The V-2 rocket was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It was developed as a weapon to attack Allied cities as a retaliation for the Allied bombings against German cities. The V-2 rocket also became the first artificial object to travel into space with the vertical launch in June of 1944. The V-2 rocket was manufactured at Mittelbau in central Germany. Mittelbau refers to a complex of factories, storage depots, facilities and prisoner camps that were used from August of 1943 until April of 1945. Its story began on the night of August of the 17th in 1943, when the Allies mounted a massive air raid on Peenemünde rocket research facility. This raid forced the Germans to look for hardened underground production locations for the V-2 rocket, and for many other key weapon production projects as well. In a meeting in late August of 1943, a series of pre-existing tunnels near Nordhausen were chosen for the new plant, to become known as the Mittelwerk or the Middle Works. It received a contract for the production of 12,000 V-2 rockets. SS Brigadier General Hans Kammler was in charge of the Mittelbau complex. He was responsible for several civil engineering projects and top-secret weapon programs. He oversaw the constructions of various camps before being put in charge of the V-2 rocket and jet programs towards the end of the war. On the 28th of August 1943, 2 days after the choice of the Mittelwerk, the SS delivered the first truckloads of prisoners from the camp at Buchenwald to begin the heavy labor of expanding and completing the tunnel system. Dora was the name given to the Buchenwald subcamp that was set up within the tunnels for the laborers. It was during October, November and December of 1943 that the most physically punishing work was done by the prisoners, who struggled under terrible, inhuman conditions to enlarge and fit out the Mittelwerk tunnels. Prisoners drilled and blasted away thousands of tons of rock. They built temporary narrow-gauge tracks to support the multi-ton loads of rock that were extracted from the caves. The prisoners were made to eat and sleep within the tunnels that they were digging. German war production planners had conceived this area as the hub for Germany's high-tech weapon development. Fortunately for the Allies, most of these production efforts never got past the site construction stage. The Mittelwerk factory produced 4,575 V-2 rockets between August of 1944 and March of 1945, the period in which these rockets were headed for the firing batteries. The Mittelwerk tunnel system consisted of 2 parallel main tunnels, A and B, each roughly 1.2 miles long, bent in a shallow S-curve and connected at various points by a regular series of cross tunnels like the rungs of a ladder. Each of the main tunnels had 2 sets of regular gauge railroad tracks running through it. In general, Tunnel A was used to transport parts and materials for the V-2 into the factory and for storage. The halls were used for assembling, testing and stocking sub-assemblies for the rockets. Tunnel B served as the primary assembly line and carrying rockets out of the Mittelwerk. Many of the halls contained offices for the German draftsmen, engineers and foremen who directed the prisoners. The general assembly process went as follows. First, the center section of the rocket, the fuselage with the two huge alcohol and liquid oxygen tanks, was assembled. Next, the propulsion group, combustion chamber, turbine pump and air bottles was attached. Then, the tail section of the rocket with its propulsion ring and fins was attached to the motor. Finally, the guidance compartment, control amplifier, electrical distribution panel, main time switch, radio equipment, etc. was attached to the front of the missile, and the completed rocket went for final testing and delivery to the launching batteries. Warheads were transported separately and attached to the rockets in the field. On the 11th of April 1945, the spearhead of the advancing American troops of the 3rd Armored Division entered Nordhausen. 3rd Armor had been warned by Army intelligence to expect something unusual in the Nordhausen area. The intelligence officer of the 3rd AD is quoted as having said that entering the Mittelwerk tunnels was like being in a magician's cave. The Americans were stunned to discover orderly rows of V-2 rocket parts and sub-assemblies stretched out through the tunnels. Work had stopped at Mittelwerk on the 10th of April 1945, but the assembly line was left with its electric power and ventilation system still running, as if the former occupants had gone out for lunch and would return after a while. Chief of the Army Ordnance Rocket Branch at the Pentagon ordered to acquire 100 V-2 rockets and ship these back to White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico for further study. Army Ordnance Special Mission V-2 was busy doing an inventory of the Mittelwerk tunnels and trying to figure out how to disassemble, pack and move a huge quantity of V-2 rocket parts and sub-assemblies to the port of Antwerp and then to the White Sands Proving Grounds in the United States. One of their first moves was to call for some US troops with basic mechanical skills, in this case the 144th Motor Vehicle Assembly Company, which had been working the docks in Cherbourg. This unit arrived at Mittelwerk in May of 1945 for the task of moving the V-2 rocket parts out of the Mittelwerk. After rounding up captured German rolling stock and clearing a way into the tunnels, Special Mission V-2 succeeded in loading up and sending off its first 40-car trainload of V-2 rocket parts on the 22nd of May 1945. The first reassembled V-2 rocket was successfully launched on the 28th of June 1946 at the White Sands in the New Mexico desert. The tunnels of the Mittelwerk languished in obscurity for almost 50 years, remaining buried in history until the German reunification in the early 1990s. By 1995, the Dora concentration camp memorial had opened, finally revealing the horrors and suffering, commemorating the prisoners who died to build the V-2 ballistic missile. Thanks for watching, and if you like military history, subscribe to my channel.